Hi guys, we've reached the season finale of Meet the Pros. It's fair to say that it's been interesting, it's been exciting, it's been informative, but it has been a challenge to say the least, to try and line up diaries, get people down, find interesting and exciting venues to drink at and explore is difficult. That being said, you join us at the Looking Glass Cocktail Club in Shoreditch. We're going to take a look back at some of the special moments from this season and enjoy a drop. Chaps, thanks for joining me. I know it wasn't necessarily that easy to organise. What I thought we'd do is do a bit of a summary as to why some of the clients who've been involved in Meet the Pros actually helped us for one, but also what brought them to the market initially. Now it's still very much a market where we're in the early adoption phase, so there's all sorts of different reasons why people are doing this. But rather than me say it, I'd be quite interested to hear some of your stories. Rick, I mean, you've had a few episodes this season.
Yeah.
What were some of the notable reasons why your clients got involved?
Sure. So Andy, who I shot with for season 2.
Ricky, how are you?
Andy, nice to see you. How are you?
Nice to see you. Good, how are you?
Yeah, good, thank you. Before being involved in our market, owning a cask of whiskey, what was the typical areas that you would tend to go into or invest in previously?
You know, I'll probably sounds a bit boring, to be honest with you, because it's mainly in ISAs, bonds, company stocks and shares, you know, and just typical savings accounts like most people tend to do. But as the markets kind of didn't really offer much back, and you know, you're looking for something else. A friend of mine, you know, introduced me to it, and you know, it's a bit more fun, a bit more exciting, something you can relate to a little bit more. So I think that's what kind of attracted me to it in the first place.
He actually had a friend who had bought casks 6 and 12 months earlier. So I'd spoken to him about it, gauged his interest, and he'd been more of a traditional investor, ISAs, stocks and shares, things of that nature. So his interest was piqued by a friend, and he just wanted to diversify because most of his portfolio is in sort of traditional areas.
It's hard sometimes when we say traditional, you almost don't want to talk about it, but I'm trying to figure out a way to describe traditional assets that isn't unkind. I was thinking vanilla, but I don't know if that's even more unkind. So he'd done the basics.
Yeah.
Was there anything for him that was a must-see or a must-understand before actually getting involved and taking the plunge?
Yeah, well, I mean, he said it in our episode, and it was quite interesting. We were one of a few companies who he'd actually spoken to. So he didn't just go online and deal with the first person that he found. He wanted to have conversations, get an idea of their approach. And, you know, he was really impressed with our onboarding process, communication, the events. So as you may have seen in the previous episode that I'd done, that was a big decision for him to make based on experience pre and post sort of transacting.
That's a good point, actually, Rick. Has anyone had a client who's helped us out with a Meet the Pros episode who's been along to one of our events, either in Edinburgh or London?
Yep.
Glenn.
Yeah, so I had Paul actually come to 2 events. One, he brought his brother along with him, and also our black tie event that we held at the end of last year. And Paul's very, very interesting how he came into this market, because obviously because of his occupation, he knows how to do due diligence and love the fact that we're a reputable company. The fact that we do things like this is something that was key for him, where he can get an insight into the people who he's working with, because this is a 5-10 year relationship. He wants that comfortability. He wants to know that we are someone who know about this market. And even came, the black tie event for him was really good and beneficial, because he won the 20 whiskies that changed the world.
It's a nice bonus.
Yeah, definitely. And it tied in great with him, because he's also a massive whiskey fan, as you see from the first episode in season 2, big Dalmore lover. And all of that kind of made into a nice cocktail of the relationship that I have with him, but the company as well. Paul's spoken with multiple people at Hackstons, gets along great with them. And it's kind of a perfect blend.
Would you say then that the most important thing for him, being someone who knows how markets work, who understands how to analyze a business and a company, it is just understanding that the organization is made up of real people, not just voices down a phone.
Yeah, and we've had that conversation because of his experience in markets that he's done, where there isn't what we like to call a peek behind the curtain, where you can go to distilleries, you can come and see us, and have that understanding on multiple levels, in person, shaking someone's hand, and meeting also other clients is fun, and having even relationships with them. So it's just a number of factors that just blend perfectly.
I think that it's probably actually quite a nice way to sum us up as an organization. We are a little bit old school in that we do like to meet people and enjoy the act of educating people about the market and ultimately building portfolios, which in today's world is definitely a bit traditional. Has anyone else spent a lot of time with one particular client?
Yeah, I think my client Callum, who was in my episode this season, he's come to a couple of our events now, and I think for someone like him, he actually has a passion for whiskey, and that's part of the reason that he got involved in the market in the first place.
Started looking at kind of what other luxury goods you could do the investments in, but whiskey pulled me because being a whiskey drinker, I was like, I've actually got a vested interest in this market. So off my own back, I like to keep fairly up to date with things that are happening, changes, and so I thought aligning in my investments with actually my interests was a really good idea. So yeah, I started doing some research and having a look around, started getting heavily targeted on Instagram, obviously.
The algorithm,
the algorithm. But it's no bad thing, because it did bring a good couple of businesses to the top of my kind of list of who I wanted to invest with, and Hackstons being one of them.
Perfect. And I think, what you said is spot on. When you can align your investments with something that's a bit of a passion for yourself, it always helps. And I mean, for a lot of the clients that I work with, it's just more of a numbers thing. But I think there's that added benefit when you are actually a whiskey drinker, that you can engage in the social side. You've been to our events before. How have you found those?
The event's been brilliant, and actually that was probably one of the biggest appeals to you guys, because there was a lot of the other businesses where they had all the stuff. You had this customer portfolio where you could where you could log in, but it all seemed very, you were the investor and they were the business kind of managing that. And Hackstons with the events, bringing the community of investors together and having more of a personal connection, I really like that. And so yeah, came to your event a couple of months back here in London. Really enjoyed it. It was great chatting to other people and finding out their reasons for investing, what they had kind of chosen to go for and how long they've been holding it for, and just really get their knowledge and their experience of investing through you guys. And it was all positives really, so just kind of confirmed that I'd made a good choice.
You kind of said that in the initial stage, he traditionally invested in stocks and shares, but this was just before the pandemic, and naturally there was an element of volatility which led him on this journey to start looking at other places to put his money in. He just found that being able to marry something that he was passionate about with something that can also make money, is the ideal situation, right? And he has got this, like I said, real passion for various different whiskies, and I found it actually quite interesting for myself, because I know about the investment side of things and he knows about the whiskies, right? So actually having conversations is quite engaging.
We won't say that he knows about the drinking side of whiskies because that would be rude, but
yeah,
nice balance.
So I think things like that are really nice, because you get to enjoy the social element as opposed to just talking numbers all the time, which I think for me as well as him is definitely enjoyable.
I'm biased. I think having that ability to do stuff is great fun. Obviously, we're still learning, even us. Every time we go to a different distillery, you learn something new, even if it's something trivial or just a different fact. It's great to be involved with something where you will never know everything. You're always learning. I mean, who else has had an interesting client story of bringing someone on board and building a portfolio for them in the last 6 months, relatively recently? Most you've probably had.
Yeah, I've had a really interesting experience. So my clients, Sue and James, they really highlighted the fact that what they loved about Hackstons was that, I mean, of course, with whiskies, there's a little bit of a gap between the investor and their cask. And they really loved the fact that we do things like audits every 6 months. So they can actually have the details of their cask and understand it is in the place we believe it to be, and the details are exactly what we say it is.
It's a little bit less interesting and fun than the events, but it's probably more important that side of things.
Absolutely, yeah. And I think the trust and the confidence really sort of went a long way with them and for them, and the transparency of it all is what they enjoyed.
And had they I don't know them, but had they had an experience beforehand where they'd not found that safety and that security?
It wasn't so much of a case where they had an experience prior to that, but they did quite a bit of due diligence, and they'd gone through a few different whiskey companies, and they were looking at their options and weighing them up, and sort of looking for the company that spoke to them in the language that they sort of understood. And
I love the stuff that we're doing to try and pioneer that safety and security, which hopefully inside of around about 2 years will be the industry standard. It's going to be a little while until we get there, I think, but it's great to start now. Yeah. But it's fair enough. You know, we're talking about serious sums of money.
Absolutely.
For, as Glenn says, 5 to 10 years. You want to know that it's there.
Absolutely.
It sounds obvious, but it's really, really important in this market when there's a lot of, there's a lot of actors out there who don't necessarily take that side of things as seriously. But Max, you must have had some similar experiences with safety and security and insurance and that sort of thing.
Yeah, I've had a few, but once they come down to the office, they get a feel of us as a company. They get to understand that it is the physical product they're buying. One client of mine, Lisa, actually, she's invested into a lot of property manager.
Lisa that came to Edinburgh.
That's the one, yes, indeed.
It's been an incredible experience, very eye-opening. Very educational. I've always liked whiskey, but not really known how it's made. I've been in the pub trade I was in the pub trade for over 20 years. So I've done lots of different wine tours and things, but this was the first whiskey tour I've done. As a company, I think Hackstons, the way that they've brought this experience together has been absolutely amazing.
So she had the same idea. She invested into assets. She can see the physical thing. It's a house. There's a front door for it. With whiskey, of course, it is still a physical asset, but it does not have that front door. So, of course, as she's come down to the office number of times, come to an event as well, it's really built her confidence up in the sense of it's still an asset. You just can't physically see it on a day-to-day basis.
Yeah. Well, Lisa was fantastic in Edinburgh. I can remember in one of the distilleries, I won't go into too much detail, but in one of the distilleries, being next to Lisa as we looked at a 58-year-old cask, as we all sort of asked the chap in there who'd worked at this one distillery for his entire life, we said, well, what's that cask? It looks a bit dusty, it looks a bit old. And it was 1965 fill, and you guys probably know where I'm going with this, but it was the 1965 58-year-old cask. And we were talking about the Angel share. And the chap there said there's probably only 40 or 45 litres left in this hogshead that was 160 when it started. And collectively, we all went, oh, Lisa included, but this chap had a bit of a wry smile on his face. It turns out that it's not the end of the world, because at 58 years old, that cask was probably worth more than 7 figures. So it was fantastic to be with people like Lisa on that occasion, actually seeing this stuff that is as expensive as that. It's absolutely incredible.
That's the peek behind the curtain that I think we all often hear that, having that interaction where they can kind of go from beginning to end in this market, from where it's made to actually coming to our events and seeing one of the bottles that us as a company have bottled. And they can go throughout that whole process with us, shoulder to shoulder, arm in arm, whatever saying is necessary. But it is actually true. We are planning to do that every 3 months. Did that last year. Everyone who came to our event got a bottle of the fire station whiskey. And the fact that they're so heavily involved in that process, it is quite rare, not only in this market, but how we provide it. And then on top of that, as Masai said, with the audit process, which, fingers crossed, within 2 years, it is an industry norm. End of.
I'm quite excited about that, because I think it will be the first thing where, we can stick our chest out a little bit and say we have actually pioneered something. First to do it. As far as I'm aware, still the only people doing it and doing it properly. It will take time for it to be, the norm. But when it is the norm, overnight, that should make it impossible for the scammers out there to operate at all. Which would be a great feeling, but we're a little way off yet. Glenn, you reminded me actually, talking of start to finish, do you guys remember the miniature distillery at Glenkinchie?
Yes.
If ever there was a model, it literally was a model, but a model of whiskey from start to finish in one room, in a model that actually worked if they turned it on. I'm really hoping we've got some footage or some pictures of that, because that was amazing. And if anyone is ever near Glenkinchie or near Edinburgh, go and see it.
Chris, you always do the talking, right? And you ask us the questions about our client experience. But if I remember correctly, you shot your Meet the Pros when we were up in Edinburgh.
I did indeed.
With Caroline?
Caroline.
And she's, what's her title?
So Caroline is and I've asked her many times, but she's such an expert, it's difficult to pin down on one particular role.
Wow.
But her foremost role, in her words, is that she was a wine educator. So she was essentially as high an achievement, as high a qualification as you can be in wine. So if ever there was somebody who knew wine, it was Caroline. So it was brilliant to be able to, speak to and get to know someone very well who is an expert with wine and appreciates what goes into a high quality spirit, high quality alcohol, but was also open to learning and understanding whiskey.
Probably this morning's distillery visit was probably my favourite, mainly I think from the point of view that I enjoyed nosing the casks. Now that's something that comes to me from my wine background, so therefore a lot of what I do, if you take into account that 70% of your sense of taste comes from your sense of smell, then by nosing things it's actually much more fun. Hackstons have been brilliant. I mean, I've dealt primarily with Chris. He's very approachable. We have long, involved conversations on the phone, from everything to from whiskey and wine to how he's doing with his Wine and Spirit Education Trust exams and how to get through the wine section for him, all sorts of things. But no, it's very friendly, amicable. There isn't a hard sell of any way, shape or form. So you're not sort of feeling under pressure. And then, afterwards you've got the compliance which says, are you sure you want this? Can you afford it? You're not going to dip into savings or anything. How are you going to fund it? They really do look after you.
So she had an amazing appreciation for quality, for the aging process, for the differences between brands, or in her case, vineyards, and what they can produce when it comes to tasting the stuff. But that was fantastic. And you're absolutely right, we filmed an episode at Whabble, just opposite the Johnny Walker experience on Princes Street, which again, we've all been to with clients. Amazing bar. You guys unfortunately couldn't come with me that afternoon, but if ever you're in Edinburgh, you have to go. Literally opposite the Johnny Walker experience. But we were in there and we were treated to some incredible whiskies. There's a clip in that episode of their fine and rare cabinet, and it's serious. Yeah. Over the last year, we've seen some auctions, we've seen some headlines about these insane bottle prices and cask prices, particularly from ghost distilleries. That's really been the pinnacle to a certain extent. This cabinet was incredible. It was a whiskey lover's dream. So I'm going to have to insist that we get a picture of that cabinet popping up here now. I'll give a space to pop up the picture somewhere here. But take a look at that video, because in it, Caroline explains that although she's invested in lots of things before, it's nice to know that this is not a get-rich-quick scheme. Mm-hmm. That's the classic phrase that I'm sure we've all heard, right? Tell me how this isn't a get-rich-quick scheme. And it's a little bit less eloquent, but I often call it a get slightly more wealthy at a reasonable pace over a long period of time scheme. Doesn't quite roll off the tongue as well, but that's what it is, isn't it? And generally everyone's clients has a great appreciation that if you can do this for 10 years, it's going to be quite exciting. Does anyone deal with a client who wants to do this for the very long term, 20, 25, 30 years?
Yeah, definitely. I think I've had a few clients that their purpose is not about themselves anymore. I think what has been quite a theme with new people to the market has been that they're actually looking at maybe trying to de-risk their portfolio a little bit, something a little bit more steady and consistent, as opposed to, like I said earlier, the volatility of stocks and shares. So quite often I find that it's people that are in their 60s or even 70s that are looking at something that they can leave to children or grandchildren. That, you know, when you see those exciting stories like the Macallan cast sold in 1988 for £5,000 and then selling last year at auction for $1 million, it's like, well, you know, look, disclaimer, we don't make any promises that that's going to happen. But when you see interesting stories like that, and you can see that if you are waiting sort of 20, 25 years and you have got one eye on the future, that exciting things can really happen, then it definitely makes the market that bit more appealing.
Well, it's discipline, isn't it? It's for those who are investing in this very, very long term, it's having the discipline and the foresight to do it. The rewards are there. I mean, generally the consensus last year was that Whisky was the second best performing tangible alternative asset. Has anyone got any guesses as to what the first was?
Rolex?
Watch is not a bad guess. It's on the list, but not what I'm thinking.
If I remember correctly, bicycles.
Correct.
Really?
Classic bicycles.
No way.
There should be a disclaimer here now saying we don't know anything about bicycles, so please don't ask us.
Well, you rode your penny farthing here this morning.
I had to watch out for potholes on London Bridge, but yeah, I mean, that's the sort of world we live in now, where investors are looking for genuine alternatives. Now, I know the bike world is very speculative. It's not something we understand. It's not as well trodden, or I should say well ridden a path of investment, but we live in a world where people want to put money outside of their stocks and shares ISA for protection.
I also find quite interesting, it's you talking about the investors investing for their grandkiddies. It reminded me, I've actually come across quite a lot of self-employed investors that invested for the really long term for their retirement, and it's their pension.
Well, what's your youngest client that you deal with?
Oh, now 28, but I've been working with him for perhaps 2 years. Yeah, so
Does anyone deal with anyone younger than that?
Yep, I've got 23, 24.
Really?
And that's a trend that I've noticed a lot, where people are actually coming in at a younger age because they're seeing all of this market news, they're seeing what's happening, and you know, they actually have the time to not only wait 10 years, but even go for some sort of Macallan Ardbeg record auction price, because they've got the time for 30 years. And to just leave it on the side, and then in 15, 20, 25 years, they've got the potential to, again, disclaimer, it won't happen, but they're putting in the right steps. And I think that's what it's about. You get your fundamentals into it, where you can hedge your bets in the right way and then reap the rewards of it in the future. And I've seen that quite a lot, where the age is just dropping and dropping to people who are keen in this market.
It sounds silly. I know we've said it before, but it's not. This is not your stereotypical market where it is more seasoned investors who love whiskey and that's their expertise and their passion. The average age, I am certain, of our average investor is getting lower and lower and lower as people become more worried about the vanilla stuff that typically it was an invest and forget and not really pay that much attention to. But you can't really do that anymore, can you, Max?
You can't indeed. You can't rely on these traditional markets nowadays with the volatility that's involved. I do have a few younger generation clients. I think my youngest isn't in the 28 range, I think about 31, and his whole plan is retirement. Contractor, works for himself, doesn't really have a retirement pot, so next best thing to leave something for 20 odd years.
Well, look, last summer I helped an 18-year-old with their first tangible asset. Done a bit of investment before, but at 18 was already thinking about retirement and investing for later life. I am so excited to see his portfolio in 20, 25 years. God, imagine if you could go back in time and invest properly when you're 18.
I'd take that Ardbeg cask, that's for sure.
But I think what's also interesting is timing, because for a lot of people they ask, oh, well, what's the overview or outlook for the market in the next few years? And when you see reports like the SWA report that came out recently talking about how whiskey exports have exceeded £6 billion for the first time on record, a growth of 21% in terms of, sort of bottles exported and 37% in terms of value, it really shows that actually the demand for whiskey isn't slowing down at all. So timing wise, it's a really interesting time to get involved.
And as amazing as those numbers were, that's all before the Indian trade deal. So it sounds obvious when you say, imagine what happens next. We have no idea. You can't quantify how that's going to change it. The SWA thinks it'll be about an extra £1 billion worth to the market. I said that like it was a £5 note, didn't I? An extra billion. But it's incredible to think how much growth there is still to be had in this market. And it's exciting not only for investors who own casks, but also for the industry in general. I mean, imagine being in the distillery and the whiskey industry in Scotland now. It'd be quite exciting.
Yeah, definitely. And just to sort of timestamp this, so it's going to be the end of Q1 in a few days of the first 3 months of 2023. And I worked in financial services many, many moons ago where we had similar type of events that are happening right now. So we've had interest rate rises over the last 10, 11 months. We're at the highest points in 2007. We all know what happened in 2008. We've had a few banks that have been bailed out recently. So, we spoke about our clients that came on camera, and the majority of them are into their whiskies because it's more of a passion for them, right? Majority of our clients are definitely not like whiskey enthusiasts. It's purely diversification. So when you read doom and gloom numbers about, what you're going to get on money in the bank, cost of living, inflation, etc., and then you read the SWA article and demand for this product, which is limited in supply, but obviously demand is growing in Asia Pacific. 5 of the top 10 countries importing the stuff are in that part of the world. You don't need to be Einstein to work out where the smart money is going. And it's not just individuals. On my side, I'm definitely seeing the corporate world and the commercial clients who are putting bigger chunks in. And especially in Asia, they're doing it in a slightly different fashion. I think we've shared some information within our client base about the research that we're doing. But for some people, it's trying to get their ducks in a row because they've got experiences from what happened in the financial markets the last time there was a huge correction.
Yeah, I mean, that's an amazing insight, having been around then.
Yeah.
I won't ask you how many moons ago it was, but obviously you've had the first-hand experience of what it was actually like. Are you noticing people doing the same things and asking the same questions that happened in the lead up to the big one in 2008?
Yeah, I mean, because that's when I started my career in financial services. So I was very much green to it all and was made redundant because of one of the banks that I worked for got bailed out by the taxpayer. So having conversations now and having the ability of 15, 16 years worth of further experience, there's definitely similar tones being made and murmurs by people that had never expected that whiskey would be part of their investment portfolio. But they read enough good things about it, and we are still at early adopter stage, like we mentioned. So there is the ability not to be priced out of this market and all of a sudden the minimum requirements become elitist.
Yeah, that's a really good point. I think the biggest thing that I've noticed in the last probably 3 or 4 months has been people talking about long-term investing as risk management. So obviously making a profit is fantastic, looking for something tax-free is great, but generally people have been looking at securing their wealth rather than necessarily shooting for the greatest returns in the world, but wanting to protect things. And it's fair enough.
Yeah, definitely. Given the climate, the era of cheap money is finished. So it's back to sort of normality, and people just getting their head around the fact that mortgage rates will be 4 or 5% rather than 0.2. Do you know what I mean? It's kind of like just getting your head back to, we've had that period, guys. Quantitative easing. We've kicked that can down the road. Now we've got to deal with the consequences. Yeah.
Well, it's a tough lesson, but for those who've got the foresight to do things the right way and learn from those lessons, that I think they're going to have a great time over the next 5, 10, 15 years. Well, guys, it's been an amazing season. Thanks for joining me. Thanks for helping make it what it was. Also, a massive thank you to those clients who've traveled to help us make it happen. I know it's not easy to get everyone's diaries to line up. It can be a real challenge, so we are eternally grateful for that. We've learned a lot. We've met some really interesting people, and we've enjoyed some great whiskies along the way as well. But it's not all doom and gloom. We've got a lot to look forward to, as you'll know. Season 3 is going to be focused around some of the other assets that we deal with. So the other tangibles, the other alternatives, which are just incredible. I know roughly what's coming, and they are definitely objects of desire. So you'll have to stay tuned as to what those are going to be, but it really is important to understand that it's not just whiskey, it's other assets as well. So that's all to look forward to, but guys, thanks for joining me, and I'll see you then. For our season finale, we've got our very own Whisky Scrabble, or Whabble. The anagram is really, really easy. It's the most important whiskey producing country in the world. The prize is pretty amazing. It's the 20 whiskies that changed the world. If you're a whiskey lover, it's brilliant. It doesn't get any better than this. If you're not, it would make a fantastic gift. To enter, like, subscribe and comment below, and then email your answer to competitions@hackstons.com or DM us on Instagram. Well, that's it. Thanks for joining us. We hope you've enjoyed it. Keep an eye out for season 3, where we'll look at some really, really interesting investments. Thanks.